It's very opaque as to how enmeshed these governments are with Israel.
I'm here with Deeley, CEO of RITE, a non-profit organisation that advocates for human rights in the Middle East and North Africa. She's recently published a report, The Post-Gaza Decline of Democracy and the Rule of Law. Mona, can you tell me a little bit about the report's findings?
Yeah, so we just published a report, The War on Palestine and the Decline of Democracy and the Rule of Law, but it does focus on Gaza because since the war on Gaza in October 23, there's been an acceleration and amplification through that war of the decline of democracy and the rule of law. And we always work in an evidence-based way. So the way we evidence this is through mapping legal cases that show this decline. And we've done it in the UK, in Europe, and in the US, all of which, because of their own political contexts, have experienced this in their own ways. The key finding is that the decline is real, and it's with us. And the thing to do now is to stop it being more entrenched. So it does require awareness of this happening and also actions to be taken. But the actions are actually, in a way, quite a simple ask for any government. And we're just asking governments to abide by the rule of law and by human rights and fundamental rights of citizens.
A recent poll found that 60% of Americans have negative views on Israel, and we've seen similar sorts of results from other countries that the report covered, places like the UK. So why are governments going against the democratic will of the people to support Israel?
Yes, so that's kind of an additional layer to everything, that basically the will of the people is not being respected in a democracy. But that's not the only problem normally, because sometimes you can have a populist opinion that actually governments are well advised to not necessarily go that way, but actually the governments are going against the opinion of their own people as well as against the law. The political reasons for it are, in a way, quite baffling, but actually we do try and trace them through a kind of decline of good governance. So that governments are no longer clearly accountable to their electorates, they're beholden to funders, they have conflicts of interest, there is a rotating door between them and industry, and even maybe governments or leaders who want to do the right thing find themselves beholden to these companies who have concentrated power, economic power, a political leverage, and dictate how their own interests. So that's kind of part of the rationale or the reason that this could be happening. But also, I think there is an entrenched policy of protection of Israel that somehow hasn't reached its logical conclusion, despite the overwhelming reasons that there should be a change of policy. And maybe that's very slowly starting to sink in, or at least we're hoping that it does, because otherwise, not only is the rule of law being jeopardized internationally, democracy itself depends on the rule of law and is also in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm. So, based on that, do you think if a strongly pro-Palestine leader was elected to the UK or the US, do you think things would change?
Well, I think that's really interesting because it's very opaque as to how enmeshed these governments are with Israel. And what's worrying is that the US is continuing in that path through legislation that they're trying to pass at the moment to do with integrating their military with more closely with the Israeli military, but also their intelligence. I mean, who does that in relation to a third state? So it seems like it's still being pushed in that direction because of the loss of popular support. So they're like, okay, we can't count on elected representatives being able to account to their electorates and still voting to fund genocide and occupation. So we have to kind of structurally enmesh it. So that's kind of moving more in that direction. And it doesn't always happen at state level. It could be Israeli companies, Israeli defense companies that are integrated within UK defense or UK economy that makes it difficult to then have policies that are less friendly towards Israel. So I think all of that requires big light to be shining on it through Parliament, through the media, through the public demanding it. What is the entrenchment that we're talking about, and why can't we extricate ourselves? Because I think we need to.
On the point of the roles of companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, these are all pressure targets for the BDS movement, which is one way that consumers can feel like they have some kind of control. But do you think those consumer boycotts can actually fight this kind of thing?
I think the difficulty is that they have such a monopoly over everything, and you're kind of always at a loss who to go to. I think people would vote with their feet much quicker otherwise. And because the EU at the moment is feeling a loss of digital sovereignty, it's starting to kind of try and find European replacements. But whether it's these companies or alternatives, if these checks and balances to do with protecting personal freedoms and democratic rights, if they're not in place, in a way it doesn't matter who takes over. But I think BDS is still very powerful because it's naming and shaming, it's getting the shareholders to react, it's getting things to court even. It's also sometimes you need to focus on a company and make it the fall guy to then that be a lesson and set a precedent. You don't have to kind of absolutely target everything. And the more targeted in a way, the better, because it's very difficult for consumers to, like so many companies, there's so much concentration of power that it's very difficult to extract yourself from everyone at once.
Do you think the ICJ and countries not upholding their ICJ commitments was a big part of the report? Do you think international law is still relevant in this context?
Yeah, I get quite upset about these quite prevalent statements that what international law is dead, so ignore it, don't even talk about it. But actually, if the ICJ opinions of January 24, which stated a risk of genocide, which triggers an obligation on states to prevent it, didn't happen, then we wouldn't be able to go to the government and say, look, you need to abide by international law. So it's very good that that case went through, and I'm so grateful for South Africa for bringing it on a kind of humanitarian level, but also on a political level. It's such a critical case. Similarly, there was an opinion in July 24 by the ICJ that reminded all nations that there is an illegal occupation of all Palestinian territories and that they have a duty not to acknowledge it and also not to aid it. So again, that means that you can go to your own government and say, but why are you still doing these actions that aid the occupation? So I think they're very important. They're not enforcement tools. It's your own governments, democratically elected, law-abiding governments that are meant to work on implementation. And that's what people are having to do on their behalf, to kind of force them to do it instead of them just naturally doing that.
Great. Thank you, Mana.
Thank you.